Imagine, if you will, a world where heroes wore sandals that definitely offered zero ankle support, where gods spent more time being dramatic than actually doing their divine jobs, and where monsters mostly wanted to be left alone, but somehow always ended up in someone's heroic side quest. Now, somewhere in that ancient sandal-shuffling chaos, there existed one figure whose story traveled through centuries, like a persistent echo. Medusa, the woman everyone knows something about, but nobody seems to remember correctly. Some say she was born a monster. Others say she was cursed. Still others, usually people who read only half a Wikipedia article, think she was basically just a dangerous snake lady with a severe hair problem. But the truth is softer, slower, sadder, and strangely comforting when told in a sleepy voice like this one. Medusa was not always a monster. In fact, she was many things before becoming the icon of Greek horror, tragedy, feminism. And please don't look directly at me. It's dangerous. Before the curse, before the tragedy, before the snakes that definitely did not come with a return policy, Medusa was simply a girl. But we'll get to that in time. Very slowly, very comfortably, with enough detail to gently bore you into the softest sleep of your life. Because tonight, we will wander step by step through her entire story. 20 chapters of myth, legend, symbolism, and occasional humor to keep you awake just long enough to fall asleep again. So settle in, relax your shoulders, let your breathing slow, pretend you're lying on a cloud that's slightly confused about its job, but doing its best anyway. And let us drift into the beginning of the world that created Medusa. If you're enjoying this slow, sleepy journey into ancient myths, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support keeps this cozy, mythic storytelling alive. Before Medusa ever became the star of tragic myths, she existed in a much larger world, an old, sun-soaked Greece, where mountains watched over humans like bored giants, where olives were practically considered personality traits, and where people absolutely loved telling dramatic stories, even when nobody asked. Back then, every hill, river, gust of wind, or suspiciously loud thunderclap had a story behind it. If it moved, sparkled, rumbled, or simply existed, someone claimed it was controlled by a god. And in this ancient world lived whispered tales of strange, shadowy beings, guardians, monsters, protectors, nightmares, and mysteries, all woven together into the fabric of Greek imagination. Among these legends were the Gorgons. Now, the Gorgons were not your everyday monsters. No Greek monsters had range. Some were basically oversized animals. Some were walking metaphors for bad decisions. And some, like the Gorgons, were so frightening that people carved their faces on shields, hoping enemies would faint before the battle even started. Imagine being so scary that you accidentally become ancient Greece's version of a home security system. That's Gorgon energy. There were said to be 3 of them: Steno, Euryale, and Medusa. The first 2 were immortal pure forces of nature, fear, and cosmic symbolism. But the third, the youngest, the one whose name echoed far beyond the myths, Medusa, was mortal. This alone made her different, fragile, strangely relatable. You could defeat her, pity her, fear her all at once. Why would a creature born among immortals be capable of death? Poets murmured theories, storytellers invented details, priests claimed divine secrets, but none of them knew the simple truth. Medusa was not supposed to be a monster. She did not begin as a terror of the night or a nightmare carved into shields. She began as someone far more delicate, far more human, far more tragic. Yet in the world of ancient Greece, where gods argued louder than thunderstorms, and humans were constantly caught in the crossfire, fate had a habit of twisting beauty into horror, and Medusapur, Medusabu become the most twisted tale of all. For now, let the ancient wind settle. The stars shimmer softly over distant temples, and the myths stretch their arms like sleepy giants waking from old dreams. Because, in the next chapter, we leave behind legends and step gently into Medusa's early life before the tragedy, before the curse, before the snakes that definitely were not included in her original hairstyle plan, before the curses, before the snakes, before her name became a warning whispered across centuries. Medusa was simply a mortal girl, not a monster, not a legend, not a symbol carved on shields, just Medusa. A girl born with soft footsteps and bright eyes, living in a world where gods could sneeze and accidentally create mountains, but where humans still had to wake up early to fetch water from the river. She lived in a small corner of Greece, place where the seaside against the rocks, where olive trees grew like gossip everywhere, and where days passed gently under the watchful sun. Medusa wasn't rich. She wasn't royalty. She wasn't the daughter of a god, or a titan, or a bored sea creature with too much free time. She was completely, beautifully human. And unlike her immortal sisters, who were born with fangs and wings and a general don't mess with me vibe, Medusa entered the world absolutely normal, well, normal for ancient Greece, meaning she probably grew up doing things like carrying clay pots larger than her head, dodging goats that had no respect for personal space, learning to pray at temples, and listening to old storytellers insist that every rock had magical powers, even though most were just rocks. Medusa loved learning. She loved quiet mornings and warm sunlight, and she especially loved visiting temples, the one place where the noise of the world faded away. People who knew her said she had a serene presence, the kind of calm that made others want to sit beside her and feel peaceful for no real reason at all. But most importantly, Medusa had a heart that cared too much. When someone was sad, she listened. When someone was struggling, she helped. She wasn't powerful or divine or unstoppable. She was compassionate, gentle, thoughtful. And perhaps that was what made her fate so unbearably tragic. Because in a world ruled by unpredictable gods, kindness was a dangerous gift. It made you visible. It made you vulnerable. And sometimes it made you a target. But for now, Medusa was still just a mortal girl living a simple life. She had no idea that destiny was watching her, slowly pulling invisible threads tighter and tighter, guiding her toward a future she never asked for. Medusa grew into her teenage years quietly, the way a sunrise grows into morning softly, gently, without meaning to draw attention. But attention found her anyway, because Medusa was beautiful. Not loud beauty, not flashy beauty, not I demand applause beauty. No, her beauty was the calm kind, the peaceful kind, the kind that made people pause, forget their worries, and wonder why the world suddenly felt a little softer. Her hair fell like dark silk, her eyes shone like still water catching light, and her smile had that rare ability to make people feel seen and safe. But beauty, especially in ancient myths, is a double-edged sword wrapped in dramatic storytelling. In a world full of jealous gods, impulsive mortals, and heroes who had a habit of causing trouble even when they were just buying groceries. Being beautiful was sometimes more dangerous than being a monster. And Medusa's beauty did not stay a quiet secret for long. People began to whisper about her in the markets. She's lovely enough to be blessed by the gods. Her face could calm a storm. Her presence feels like a blessing, like Athena herself crafted her. And that last comment, that comparison, was the spark that would eventually ignite an entire tragedy. Because Medusa's beauty was famous not only among mortals, but among gods. Rumors drifted up like incense smoke, reaching ears that should never have heard them. Some claimed Medusa's hair was more elegant than the statues on Athena's temple. Others said her eyes reflected wisdom deeper than marble carvings. A few even said she was more beautiful than Athena herself. Now, you and I know that beauty is subjective. Everyone has their own taste, and comparing humans to gods is like comparing a house cat to a lightning bolt. They're not even the same category. But ancient Greeks, they loved comparisons, and gods, they hated losing. Still, Medusa didn't see herself as extraordinary. She brushed her hair in the morning, washed her face in the river, and helped her neighbors without ever realizing how many people whispered her name. She didn't walk through the world thinking, I am beautiful. She walked through it thinking, I hope today is calm and everyone is okay. Medusa was humble, tender, and unaware of the storm quietly forming around her. Because beauty, especially gentle beauty, can attract admiration and envy and danger. Before tragedy wrapped its cold fingers around her fate, Medusa lived a life filled with peace, purpose, and quiet devotion. She served as a priestess of Athena, a role of honor, discipline, and endless sweeping of temple floors that somehow always got dusty again. The Temple of Athena was a place of calm stone, tall columns, and echoes that made even the smallest cough sound dramatically important. It sat on a hill where the wind whispered through olive trees, as if sharing ancient secrets with anyone who cared to listen. Medusa loved it there. She loved the stillness. She loved the rituals. She loved the sense of safety that wrapped around her like a warm blanket. Serving Athena wasn't glamorous. There were no gold robes or magical powers or backstage passes to Mount Olympus. Instead, the duties were simple: lighting incense each morning, cleaning altars, preparing offerings, guiding visitors, and maintaining a calm, respectful environment, which, considering humans, probably required a lot more patience than the gods acknowledged. But Medusa found comfort in the routine. She found meaning in the silence of the temple halls, in the glow of oil lamps flickering across marble walls, in the feeling that she was giving something back to the world. And Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, goddess of strategy and reason, goddess whose statues always looked like they knew a secret you didn't. Athena was Medusa's inspiration. Not because Medusa wanted power, not because she wanted glory, but because she admired the goddess's strength, clarity, and purpose. Medusa tried to embody these qualities, to be steady, calm, and wise. People often came to the temple seeking guidance, and Medusa would listen with patient eyes, offering gentle words that somehow eased their worries. She didn't speak with divine authority, but with human kindness, and sometimes kindness reaches deeper than thunderbolts ever could. And so the days passed, beautifully, quietly, like pages of a book being turned by a soft breeze. Medusa lived her life with devotion, never imagining that fate was quietly rearranging the pieces of her world. Because the temple the very place she loved most, was also the stage where her tragedy would unfold. The gods pay close attention to their sacred spaces, and when something goes wrong in a temple, it doesn't go slightly wrong, it goes mythology level wrong. But tonight, we rest in the calm before the storm. Medusa still walks the marble floors in peace, still lights the lamps with steady hands, still prays beneath Athena's towering statue with a heart full of faith. The shadows have not yet lengthened, the danger has not yet entered, the curse has not yet begun, but it is coming, softly, quietly, with footsteps that cannot be stopped. The temple had always been Medusa's safe place, a quiet world of marble floors, flickering lamps, and soft prayers that floated upward like warm breath on a cold morning. But safety, in Greek mythology, is a fragile thing. It stands like a vase on the very edge of a shelf, beautiful. But one unexpected moment can send everything crashing down. And that moment was coming for Medusa. It began as just another day, a regular morning, the kind where birds chirped a little too cheerfully, and the sun rose with that gentle confidence of a celestial being who absolutely knew it looked good. Medusa was inside the temple, lighting incense. She moved with her usual calm grace, breathing in the familiar scent of olive oil and old stone. She didn't know that trouble was approaching, loud, impulsive, heroic trouble, disguised as a god, Poseidon. Now, Poseidon was the god of the sea, earthquakes, horses, and apparently questionable decision-making. He was powerful, yes, majestic, certainly, but subtle, respectful, quiet, absolutely not. He entered the temple not with reverence, but with the casual arrogance of someone who believed the world existed for his convenience. The wind outside paused, the ocean far away stirred, the air inside the temple shifted, barely noticeable, but enough to make Medusa turn. She saw Poseidon, tall, gleaming, divine, a figure carved from storm clouds and ocean foam. But Medusa did not feel awe, she felt fear, not because he was a god, but because of the way he looked at her, as though she were something he wanted to take. Medusa stepped back. Her heart thudded like distant thunder. This was Athena's temple, sacred and protected. Poseidon should not have been there. No god should step inside without respect, and Medusa, devoted priestess that she was, told him so, softly, politely, bravely. But Poseidon was not a god known for listening. And what happened next, the moment that shattered Medusa's world, was something she would never have chosen, never imagined, never deserved. The temple, once her sanctuary, became a place of violation. A moment of divine cruelty unfolded in its sacred walls. A moment that left Medusa broken, frightened, and forever changed. None of it was her fault, not a single breath of it. Yet the world of mythology often punishes the innocent and shields the powerful. When it was over, Poseidon left. No guilt, no apology, just the casual footsteps of a god who had caused damage and walked away from it. Medusa was left kneeling on the cold floor, shaking, ashamed, terrified, not of what she had done, but of what would happen next, because Athena, wise sharped Athena, did not tolerate violation of her temple, and she was watching. The shadows in the temple shifted, the air thickened. A divine presence swirled like a storm, gathering strength. Athena had arrived, and Medusa's life was about to break in ways she could never have foreseen. The temple grew silent after Poseidon vanished, a horrible, echoing silence that wrapped around Medusa like a cold shroud. Her breaths came in small, shaking pieces. Her hands trembled against the marble floor. She wanted to stand, but her body felt heavier than grief itself. And then the air changed. Not a breeze, not a sound, but a feeling, like wisdom sharpening into anger. Athena had arrived. Her presence did not enter the temple through doors or windows. It simply was a sudden, overwhelming awareness that filled every corner of the hall. The lamps flickered. Shadows rippled like startled birds. Medusa felt the weight of divine eyes upon her, cold and unblinking. Athena stepped forward, not as a loving goddess, not as a protector, but as an unyielding force of justice and sacred order. Her armor shone with an icy brilliance. Her spear hummed with silent fury. Her gaze was sharp enough to cut stone. Medusa lifted her head just slightly, enough to whisper, brokenly, I didn't choose this." But Athena's anger was not aimed at the truth. It was aimed at the insult, the violation of her temple. And in the ancient world of myths, gods rarely punished the guilty. They punished the nearest mortal. Athena spoke, her voice calm, terrifyingly calm, the kind of calm a storm has just before it tears the sky apart. "You have brought shame upon my sacred hall." Medusa's heart twisted. It wasn't me. Her voice barely breath, barely sound. But Athena was not listening. Or perhaps she refused to listen. Or perhaps myths themselves demanded tragedy over justice. The goddess raised her hand. Light gathered in her palm. Cold, white, merciless light. "You will no longer walk this world as a symbol of beauty," Athena declared. "You will become a warning, a reminder, a curse." The light burst outward. Medusa gasped, not from pain, but from the sensation of something inside her splitting, shattering, changing. Her hair shimmered, twisting, curling, hissing, strands turning into serpents, slithering where soft locks once fell. Her skin hardened like ancient stone. Her eyes burned with a power she never asked for, a power she feared instantly. Athena's voice rang out, final and cruel. "From this moment, whoever gazes upon you shall turn to stone." Medusa's breath caught, her heart sank, her world collapsed. Athena stepped back, expression unreadable. Somewhere between anger and sorrow, between divine justice and divine mistake, Medusa whispered through trembling lips, "Why?" But no answer came. The goddess vanished, leaving behind only silence, the heaviest silence Medusa had ever known. Inside the temple she once loved, Medusa stood transformed, cursed, alone. Tears fell from her eyes, landing on the marble floor with soft, tragic taps. But wherever they touched, the stone cracked. Her sorrow was poison. Her grief was power. Her life was no longer her own. And outside, the world remained unaware that a gentle girl had just become a legend, a monster, a warning carved into myth. Medusa's world had been turned upside down. The quiet, gentle girl who had served faithfully in Athena's temple was gone, replaced by a creature that was both tragic and terrifying. The Gorgon. It began slowly. At first, she felt a strange tingling in her hair, then a hiss, then another. Her soft, dark locks began twisting into writhing snakes, each alive, each whispering, each a reminder of the goddess's judgment. Her skin hardened, cold and pale like marble, and her eyes began to glow with a strange, petrifying power. When she looked into a mirror or tried to, she barely recognized herself. The reflection was beautiful, yes, but dreadful, powerful, yet utterly isolating. Medusa stumbled through the temple, her movements cautious, Every hiss of a snake, every movement of her new form reminded her of the curse. She wanted to cry, but the tears felt heavy, like drops of stone. And yet, amidst the fear and sorrow, there was a quiet awakening. The curse had given her strength, a strange, undeniable power. Even in her pain, she realized that she would survive. Even in her exile, even in her isolation, she would endure. The world would see her as a monster, but Medusa would come to understand. She was more than the fear she inspired. She was a story, a warning, a being of tragic beauty and one who could never be forgotten. Her transformation was complete. The mortal girl was gone. The Gorgon had arrived. And as the night settled over the temple, Medusa took her first tentative steps into a world that would never look at her the same way again. Medusa's snakes were more than just frightening hair. They were a story in themselves. In myths, snakes often symbolize power, danger, and transformation. For Medusa, each writhing serpent carried meaning, protection, guarding her from those who might harm her, rebirth, a reminder that her old life as a mortal girl was gone and something new had begun, warning, a signal to the world that she was no longer ordinary, that even a glance could have consequences. At first, Medusa hated them. Their hissings reminded her constantly of Athena's curse and the loss of her humanity. Yet, slowly, she began to see them differently. They were her companions, her guardians, and her voice in a world that had suddenly turned against her. The snakes also mirrored her emotions. When she felt fear, they shivered and hissed. When she felt anger, they coiled and writhed. And when she felt the rare flicker of peace, they lay quietly, like soft shadows resting upon her shoulders. Medusa began to understand something vital. Her curse was not just punishment, it was power. It was a way to survive. It was a way for the world to remember her not as a helpless victim, but as a being of strength and presence. Though terrifying to others, the snakes were part of her identity. They were a crown forged from tragedy, a symbol of endurance and transformation. And so, even in exile and fear, Medusa began to adapt to her new reality. She was no longer just a mortal girl. She was the Gorgon, and the world beyond her island would have to reckon with her. After Athena's curse, Medusa could no longer remain in her beloved temple. The marble halls she had once walked with gentle footsteps, the flickering lamps, and the soft scent of incense of it became a memory, distant and untouchable. She wandered far, seeking solitude, a place where no human would accidentally look into her eyes. Each step away from the temple was heavy with grief, each shadow a reminder of her lost life. Exile was lonely. The world that had once praised her beauty now feared her power. No laughter, no gentle voices, no simple greetings, only distance and silence. And yet, even in this isolation, Medusa discovered something new: freedom. No one could command her. No one could judge her. She could walk without fear of offending the gods or being misunderstood by humans. Her power, once a curse, became her shield. Over time, she learned to move silently, to hide in caves, and to live in harmony with the remote lands she now called home. The serpents on her head were no longer terrifying strangers. They obeyed her, responded to her moods, and became constant companions. Exile, though painful, allowed her to reflect and grow. She remembered the mortal girl she once was, but she also began to embrace the Gorgon she had become. Her strength, her caution, and even her solitude shaped her into someone the world would never forget. And so, far from humans, temples, and cities, Medusa slowly carved a life for herself, a quiet, careful life, where she could survive, adapt, and exist as both curse and legend. Medusa's exile eventually led her to a remote, wind-swept island, far from human eyes. It was a place where the cliffs met the sea in jagged lines, where waves whispered secrets to the rocks, and where the wind sang a constant, lonely song. This island became her sanctuary. Here she could move freely without fear of turning anyone to stone. Here she could hide from a world that no longer understood her. Here she could simply exist. The island was not a paradise. It was harsh, rocky, and often lonely. The sun burned brightly during the day, and at night the stars seemed impossibly distant. But in that solitude, Medusa found a strange comfort. The isolation gave her space to think, to grieve, and to grow stronger. Her snakes, once symbols of curse and fear, became companions. They responded to her emotions, coiling when she was angry, resting when she was calm, hissing softly when she was alert. Through them, she felt a strange connection to life, even in her loneliness, and she was not completely alone. Her sisters, Steno and Euryale, shared the island. They were immortal Gorgons, fierce and eternal, and though they rarely spoke of affection, their presence reminded Medusa that she was not entirely alone in her suffering. The island taught her patience. She learned which paths were safe, where to hunt for food, which caves would shelter her from storms. She learned to use her curse as protection rather than fear. She discovered that survival was not just about hiding, but about understanding her own power and limits. In time, the island became more than a place of exile. It became a home, a quiet, somber home, shaped by grief, wisdom, and the slow rhythm of the sea. Here, Medusa began to accept her new life, understanding that while the world might never embrace her, she could still endure. Yet, even in this hidden sanctuary, the threads of fate were drawing closer. For beyond the waves, a hero's journey was beginning, a journey that would bring Medusa face to face with destiny once more. Medusa was not alone on her island. Two immortal sisters, Steno and Euryale, shared her exile, though their presence was different from human companionship. Steno, the eldest, was fierce and unyielding. Her eyes seemed to hold storms, and her voice carried the weight of centuries. She rarely smiled, but when she did, it was like a flash of lightning, brief, intense, unforgettable. Steno was strength incarnate, a reminder that some powers are eternal and uncompromising. Euryale, on the other hand, was softer but equally intimidating. Her gaze could pierce the bravest of souls, and her wings, if you looked closely, shimmered with shadowy light. Though immortal, she carried a quiet melancholy, a depth that reminded Medusa of herself. With Euryale, silence was not empty, it was shared understanding. Together, the sisters created a strange, protective balance. Steno was the warning, the shield, the outward ferocity. Euryale was the solace, the quiet, the steady presence that reminded Medusa she was not completely abandoned. Medusa learned from them, slowly, in ways words could not capture. She watched how Steno moved with absolute certainty, how Euryale waited patiently, and she realized that even in a world defined by curses, there could be family, connection, and survival. The sisters rarely spoke of the past, or of Athena's wrath, or of the mortal life Medusa had lost. But their eyes said everything. They had endured, survived, and adapted, and so could she. In this quiet companionship, Medusa began to reclaim her sense of self, not as a mortal girl, not as a punishment, but as a being who could endure, who could live, and who could still be powerful in her solitude. Yet the world beyond the island was moving, as always. A hero's journey was quietly beginning. A quest that would bring Medusa from the safety of her sanctuary into the sharp edges of destiny. Far beyond the windswept island where Medusa hid, the world of mortals bustled with heroes, kings, and quests that seemed far too dangerous for anyone to survive. Among them was Perseus, a young hero of noble birth. Though unaware of how tightly his life would soon intertwine with myth and tragedy, Perseus' journey began with a challenge task given by King Polydex, a ruler more interested in flaunting his power than in kindness. The king demanded a gift impossible to obtain: the head of Medusa, the mortal Gorgon, whose gaze could turn any living thing to stone. For Perseus, this was terrifying, daunting, and frankly, a little ridiculous. A mortal boy expected to retrieve the head of a monster without losing his own. Even the bravest heroes paused at this thought. But Perseus was not ordinary. He was clever, resourceful, and, with a little luck, brave enough to attempt the impossible. He accepted the quest, fully aware that failure meant certain death, or worse, turning into stone. Before setting out, Perseus prepared as carefully as any mortal could. He consulted wise men, studied maps, and listened to tales of the Gorgon sisters, learning all he could about their strength, their immortality, and the dangers that awaited him. Every whispered story, every cautionary tale, made his journey feel heavier, but also more urgent. Yet, even as he traveled, Perseus could not imagine the true scale of the challenge. Medusa was not simply a monster to be slain. She was a being of grief, strength, and tragic power, living far from the world of kings and mortal concerns. And facing her would test him in ways no map, sword, or shield could prepare him for. So he set off, leaving behind the safety of human civilization, venturing into unknown lands, carrying with him a mix of courage, fear, and the hope that he could succeed where so many stories ended in failure. The threads of fate were tightening. The paths of hero and Gorgon were about to cross. Perseus' quest was impossible without help. After all, how could a mortal boy confront a being whose gaze could turn anyone to stone? The gods, ever watchful and curious about mortal affairs, decided to intervene, though in their usual dramatic way. Each gift they offered was both magical and symbolic, a reminder that heroes often succeed not just through courage, but with a little divine assistance. Athena, the wise and ever-strategic goddess, gave Perseus a polished shield, perfectly smooth like a mirror. Use it to see Medusa without looking directly at her, she instructed. The shield reflected not only his image, but also the cleverness needed to survive. Hermes, the swift and mischievous messenger god, provided winged sandals. With them, Perseus could move faster than the eye could follow, dancing over land and sea, evading dangers that would have caught ordinary mortals. Hades lent his helm of invisibility, allowing Perseus to hide when the shadows threatened to overwhelm him. With this, the world could not see him, and he could approach Medusa without being noticed. Finally, Perseus received a small, sharp sword, gifted by the gods, tempered in divine fires. It was light enough to wield quickly, but strong enough to sever what needed severing. With each gift, Perseus felt the weight of destiny on his shoulders, but also a strange sense of confidence. These tools did not guarantee success. He would still face fear, danger, and the unknown, but they gave him a chance. As he strapped on the sandals, raised the mirrored shield, and tested the invisible helm, Perseus felt a flutter of excitement mixed with dread. The world beyond the islands stretched vast and perilous. The Gorgon sisters awaited, and Medusa, with her writhing hair of serpents and eyes that could turn stone, was closer than he imagined. Every hero needs a moment to breathe before the storm. Perseus took that moment, feeling the gifts of gods settle around him like protective shadows. Then, with a deep breath, he began his journey toward destiny. Perseus set out from the world of kings and cities into the unknown, carrying the gifts of the gods like fragile hope wrapped in leather and metal. The journey was long and strange. He crossed deserts where the sun baked the sand into gold, forests where shadows whispered like old secrets, and rivers that seemed to flow in reverse, as if time itself were playing tricks. Every step tested his courage. Bandits, wild beasts, and the unpredictable elements made him question if the quest was even possible. But the thought of Medusa, mortal Gorgon, powerful and tragic, kept him moving. He could not afford hesitation. The winged sandals carried him faster than the eye could follow, while the invisible helm kept him hidden from the creatures that roamed lands untouched by humans. The mirrored shield rested on his arm, a silent reminder to act wisely. Even in his solitude, Perseus was not entirely alone. The gods watched, subtly guiding his path, their whispers blending with the wind. Athena's wisdom, Hermes' speed, Hades' secrecy, they were all within his grasp, ready to help when the journey became too dangerous. As he neared the distant island, the world seemed to pause. The waves slowed, the cliffs of the Gorgon's home loomed in the horizon, and a strange, eerie silence settled over the land. Perseus' heart raced not with fear alone, but with the weight of destiny pressing on him. He knew that once he stepped onto the island, there would be no turning back. Medusa awaited, and the encounter would test everything he had: courage, skill, and the delicate balance between mercy and survival. But for now, he pressed forward, one careful step at a time. The island drew closer with every heartbeat, and soon the story of hero and Gorgon would collide. Perseus finally reached the Gorgon's island. The cliffs rose like jagged teeth from the sea, and the wind carried a hiss soft, sinister, and alive. He adjusted the mirrored shield on his arm and took a deep breath, feeling every heartbeat echo in the quiet. The island was silent, too silent. The shadows seemed to move on their own, curling and twisting like they were alive. And then, from the caves, he felt a presence, a terrible, beautiful, sorrowful presence. Medusa stood there, still, her snakes writhing gently around her head. She had seen him coming long before he stepped onto the rocky shore, and now the air between them was thick with tension. Her eyes gleamed like polished stone, warning him, daring him, testing him. Perseus knew he could not look directly at her. He raised the mirrored shield and watched her reflection, careful, measured, steady. Every step had to be precise, every movement calculated. One mistake, one glance, and his life could end in a heartbeat. Medusa hissed softly, not in anger, but in a language born of sorrow and warning. She was not a mindless monster. She was a being shaped by loss, exile, and a cruel twist of fate. And yet, the hero had to act. He could not falter. Carefully, silently, Perseus approached. The sword in his hand felt impossibly light, yet impossibly heavy with responsibility. With each step, he reminded himself, this was a quest given by gods. but also a moment that could define both their stories forever. The final confrontation was not just about strength. It was about courage, timing, and respect for a creature who had been wronged beyond measure. And in that quiet, frozen moment before action, the world seemed to hold its breath. Perseus raised the sword, shield ready, heart steady, and the next moment would decide everything. The island held its breath as Perseus approached, shield raised and sword in hand. Medusa's gaze remained carefully avoided, reflected only in the polished surface of his shield. Every movement was slow, deliberate, like a dance on the edge of danger. Medusa, sorrowful, yet aware of the inevitability of this encounter, remained still. She was not attacking, not fleeing. She simply existed, a tragic figure frozen in fate. With a final deep breath, Perseus struck. The sword moved swiftly, guided by courage, preparation, and divine gifts. In a single, precise moment, the unthinkable happened. Medusa's head was severed from her body. The world seemed to shiver. The air carried the soft hiss of the snakes one last time, their voices fading into silence, as if whispering farewell to the sister they had once crowned. Though her body fell, her head retained its terrifying, petrifying power. Perseus carefully placed it in a bag, aware that even in death, Medusa remained dangerous, a reminder of her strength, her tragedy, and the curse that had shaped her life. And yet, in that tragic moment, there was a spark of transformation. From Medusa's blood and legacy, new life would emerge. Creatures born of myth, symbols of hope, power, and the strange intertwining of life and death. Though Perseus had completed the quest, he carried with him the weight of what had been lost. Medusa was gone, but her story, tragic, powerful, unforgettable, would continue. Even in death, Medusa's story did not end. From the moment her head was severed, something extraordinary happened. From her blood and the remnants of her curse, two beings sprang into existence. Pegasus, the winged horse, majestic and free, soaring toward the skies, and Chrysaor, a giant born of strength and golden glory. These miraculous births were symbols of what tragedy and loss could create. Though Medusa had suffered and been punished unjustly, life and power continued through her. Pegasus would inspire countless tales of flight, freedom, and heroism. Chrysaor would become a figure of strength and courage in the myths that followed. It was a bittersweet miracle. Medusa herself would never see the world again, never feel the wind on her face or the warmth of the sun. But in these children born from her suffering, a piece of her enduring spirit lived on. Even as Perseus carried her head away, even as her story passed into legend, Medusa's legacy quietly whispered, "Power, life, and myth can arise from the deepest tragedies." And so, while her life had ended, the world had gained something new, beautiful, magical, and eternal. Proof that even in the darkest tales, creation and wonder could emerge. Even in death, Medusa was far from powerless. Her head, severed from her body, but still alive with its petrifying gaze, became one of the most fearsome weapons in all of Greek mythology. Perseus carried it carefully, wrapped in a magical bag, aware that a single glance could turn him more anyone else into stone. He realized that Medusa's head was more than a tool of death. It was a reminder of her strength, her curse, and the tragic injustice she had suffered. Throughout his journey home, Perseus used the head strategically when pursued by enemies. He revealed Medusa's face, freezing them instantly in a tableau of stone. When he needed to protect allies, the mere threat of her gaze kept danger at bay. And when he presented it to King Polydex, the king who had demanded her death, the power of Medusa's head ensured justice in a way mortal weapons could never achieve. Even gods acknowledged the potency of her head. It was not just a weapon, it was a symbol of fear, yes, but also of the consequences of hubris, cruelty, and disregard for the innocent. Yet, while Perseus wielded the head, the story also reminded the world of Medusa's tragedy. She had been beautiful, devoted, and innocent, transformed into a monster through no fault of her own, and ultimately killed by a hero in a tale shaped by divine whims. The head's power was awe-inspiring, but it also carried the weight of her suffering. Every glance reminded mortals that the world could be cruel, unpredictable, and unjust, but that courage, wit, and even a little divine help could survive in the face of tragedy. Eventually, the head was given to Athena herself. She placed it upon her shield, the Aegis, turning Medusa's power into a protective symbol for gods and heroes alike. In this way, Medusa's story continued, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a symbol of enduring strength, fearsome beauty, and immortal presence. Even in death, Medusa remained unforgettable. Her head was both a weapon and a warning, a legacy that would echo through time, teaching lessons about justice, power, and the tragic fate of those caught between gods and mortals. Though Medusa's life ended in tragedy, her story never truly ended. From the darkest depths of myth, she emerged as a symbol that continues to inspire, warn, and captivate even thousands of years later. Her life, cursed by gods and shaped by suffering, reminds us that innocence can be punished, beauty can be dangerous, and power can be misunderstood. She was both victim and legend, human and monster, sorrowful and unstoppable. Artists throughout time have captured her image in stone, paint, and metal. Her head adorns shields. Her face inspires fashion. Her gaze haunts stories. Even today, the name Medusa carries a mixture of fear, respect, and fascination. She has become more than a girl turned Gorgon. She is an icon of strength, resilience, and transformation. The snakes on her head symbolize the power to protect oneself, the danger of injustice, and the mysterious beauty that comes from tragedy. Her story reminds us that even in exile, in solitude, in sorrow, life can leave an enduring mark. Her head became a weapon, yes, but also a symbol of courage, strategy, and the delicate balance between fear and respect. Medusa's sisters, the creatures born from her death, and the hero Perseus all played their parts, but the legend belongs to her. The mortal girl who became a monster, the Gorgon who endured exile, and the myth that continues to echo in the hearts of all who hear it. So, as we close the pages of her story tonight, remember the lessons hidden within the myths. Tragedy can create beauty, pain can create power, and even the most fearful stories carry meaning and memory. Now, it's time to let your eyelids grow heavy. Let the whispers of myths and the gentle hissing of snakes fade into dreams. Close your eyes, breathe slowly, and drift into a world of stories, legends, and quiet imagination. Good night. May your dreams be as magical and mysterious as the tale of Medusa herself.